Welcome to the Law, Your Money and You. I'm Roberta Saphire, an attorney in Massachusetts.
And I'm Camille Barron, a financial coordinator also in Massachusetts. And today, Roberta, we have yet another return guest by popular demand. We have a very interesting topic today because there's new information that's come out in the past year or two.
On what?
On lots of things.
Okay. And anyway, we are so proud and excited because this is the fellow I always say taught us care and show that you care and you'll be successful, or if you're not, you're on your way. That's so important. Stewart Hirsch, you are an attorney, but you do other things. So let's talk. Let's talk. You've got this latest topic, which is really outrageous in a good way.
Okay. As you probably know, I'm a recovered attorney, recovering attorney. The phrase is used all the time now. I have moved from being an attorney in a law firm as a litigator and moving to a smaller firm and then moving in-house to a company. And before the company passed away, it had a large change. They had to look lean and mean for the banks.
And how many in your family? Because I know you've got, we're going to talk about rights of women and this and that. But I want the people to know that you have a family with women in it. You have one son.
Well, I have a wife. That's one woman, and I have a daughter, who's my youngest, and three sons.
Oh, okay. I had three brothers and a thing. So she's very important, that little girl.
Oh, they all are. I'm not getting trapped by that one.
Squeal. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. We're talking today. You have many things to talk about, but today we're talking about unconscious. Unconscious bias? Is it unconscious?
Unconscious
the right word?
or implicit.
Oh, okay.
Implicit bias.
Tell us what that is.
So implicit bias is we all have biases, and biases that are implicit are inside of us, and when they're unconscious, we don't even know that we're exhibiting those biases. And so the topic I suggested that we might be looking at a little bit is unconscious gender bias.
In this time of diversity, it's very important, whether it's gender-related or any other type of diversity.
That's the same bias as prejudice.
Yeah, so can you give us an example of something that's unconscious or implicit
Gender
bias?
Well, it's oftentimes it's how it comes out. So I'll give you a really stark example. I was at a conference in the last few days, and a woman who was a leader in a pretty decent-sized organization was told, "You don't look like a leader." So that is what we might call unconscious images. And so what does a leader look like? Right? Or what does an executive look like? So you say, "You don't look like an executive."
I got that all the time.
The response was, sorry?
I'm an interrupter, as we all
Okay,
know. And
go
I
for it.
probably look like an interrupter. But I used to get, "Well, you don't look like an attorney." I says, "Yeah, well, that's good because I can stand next to the opponents and they talk about the case and they don't even know I'm there." So hopefully they use these detriments or discriminations to their benefit.
Well, when you're a general counsel of a company, which is a lot of the people that I spend my time around, or deputy general counsel, and someone is told you don't look like an executive, then maybe they don't let you into the C-suite meetings, or you don't get to go into the board meetings. And how would she look like an executive to the people that are saying it? Well, we all have these images. So imagine, if you would, that you're sitting in a room, and you're a shareholder in a Fortune 500 company, and you're at the shareholders meeting, and the chief executive officer walks up to the podium to give the shareholder report, and you're looking at this person, and what do you see? Do you see a man or a woman? Do you see a black person, a white person? What do you see?
I think a man.
Yeah.
I think a man.
Although, all dressed up. I understand what you're saying.
So that's an unconscious image. So if we have images of what we think people are supposed to look like, and someone doesn't look like that image, then that person loses out on opportunities. Particularly in the workplace, but maybe in other contexts. I'm really focused more in the workplace when I'm addressing this issue.
When you ask that question to most people, what does the person look like?
Most
Is that what they say?
men and women both would typically say a man, a white man.
A white man. Okay.
Yeah, typically. I
Is
mean, not
late
everybody. Some
40s,
people will
early
hold back.
50s, dressed well. How did this?
Yeah, I don't
how
know if
did
they go
this
that
come up?
far.
Who put their finger on unconscious bias? I mean, how do you put your finger on it? How do you recognize it? I mean, what do you do? How do
Well,
you admit that you're that way?
I think, I mean, Harvard has a test, which is an implicit bias assessment, which if you Google Harvard implicit bias, you know, everyone can take this assessment. And apparently, we all have biases, and I haven't taken it yet. I need to do that. But we all have biases, and the issue is whether or not we recognize them. So the goal is to move these biases that we have from an unconscious, these implicit biases from an unconscious level to a conscious level, because we're responsible for how we act. However those biases got into us in the beginning, I guess it almost doesn't matter, but what does matter is what do we do about it?
Well, that's a
And
very
so-
good question, because I had to take a compliance course for my job, and one of the compliance courses was about exactly diversity bias. It wasn't just gender. And after that, I became aware of how I might, it's always like the first thing that comes to mind when you are in a situation, whether it's work or not. And I thought to myself, when I noticed this, like I wasn't at work, I was in a store, I noticed this and I'm saying, what are you thinking? And yet they just come into your mind. I don't act on them, but is it possible to even change that initial unconscious bias to something else? Is it possible to change that?
So I'm not a neuroscientist. There is neuroscience on this, and there's so much information that's coming out about this. And I'm relatively new to the area. My eyes were opened in the last few years. I've been working with Caroline Turner. I mentioned her. She wrote this book that I mentioned, Difference Works.
You wrote an article too.
Well, I wrote an article we called it Unconscious. It was about unconscious gender bias, and actually I don't remember the name of it, but it was how to move your influencing an inclusive culture for women. And what we did was we outlined 4 specific types of unconscious bias that people tend to have. And we talked about them and ways for people to get around them. And we talked about it in the workplace. So, Caroline, who was the general counsel of Coors in her day and who now has moved into consulting, wrote this book called Difference Works, in which she talks about how we look at things, do things differently, masculine, feminine, on a masculine, feminine scale. And I won't go into all the detail now unless you want to do that, but I'll talk about the 4 different areas
I'd like
that
to
we
hear that.
defined and that she's defined and we worked on together. And we have a new article coming out in the next month for the American Bar Association on unconscious bias as well. It's about struggling to meet diversity goals and why can't people do that? Because there's diversity and there's inclusion. So let's just talk about the 4.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about these 4 areas,
Yeah,
because
let's talk about those.
we think these 4 areas are the reason, and maybe others, but these are what we think the 4 key ones are that keep people from reaching their diversity goals. And of course, then reaching the inclusion goals, because without inclusion, diversity, hiring doesn't really help unless you have inclusion.
Sure.
Yeah, so the 4 points we started to talk about were 4 types of unconscious bias. And if we can pinpoint what the unconscious bias actually is, then we might be able to open our eyes, recognize it, and then do something about it. So the first one, and this is from our article, and Caroline has this in a number of her materials. I think I mentioned that Caroline, who wrote Difference Works, has spent a lot of time in this. So when women behave, and this is gender bias, so women behave in a certain way, like collaborative, in the business world will be collaborative and bring people in and kind of not be hard on people and so on. What happens is that she's not seen as a leader. But if, on the other hand, she behaves in a masculine way, more stereotypical masculine ways, and is aggressive, then she's deemed or is assertive and speaks up like a male might, then she has an edge. So she can't win either way. She can't, no matter what she does, she's not seen in the way that she wants to be seen, because she's supposed to be, lack of a better word, ladylike, which is a little absurd on one hand, But on the other, she acts like the typical male in a male-dominated organization. Then she's aggressive and she's has an edge, and there's other words that people use
Yeah.
that are even more inappropriate.
Sure.
So that's one place. The second one is we call it unconscious images. And that's the one where I described earlier, where I said, someone said, well, you don't look like an executive. And I think we talked earlier about the CEO who walks up. So that's the unconscious images. The comfort principle is really interesting. That's people tend to like people and want to be around people that are like themselves. So that comes up in a lot of contexts, like who gets the work. So there was one instance I heard very recently. A woman is sitting in a room with two other men, young lawyer, and a male lawyer senior partner comes in and says to the men, you want to come to lunch, and did not invite her. And I don't know, it sounds like he ignored her, but he ignored her because he wanted to take the people that were like him out to lunch. Yeah. And so who was taking her out to lunch? No one. So she missed out on these opportunities.
Yes.
Now, if brought to his attention, I suspect it would have been very different, but he really didn't notice.
He didn't even think of it.
Didn't even think of it. Totally implicit and unconscious.
Sure.
So another example is a lawyer I worked with in a very large firm in another city, and he wanted to take out a couple of guys. He likes to go golfing, and there were a couple of gentlemen that he likes to go golfing with, happened to be white associates in his firm, and he could easily, because he's been trained in unconscious bias, he went through a whole training, he recognized that he was excluding the African American lawyers because they didn't get access to him. Having access is really important in certain business environments. And so he was missing that access. And so, or they were missing the access because they didn't play golf, the two African American lawyers. So he had to figure out ways to engage them with something that would be appropriate for them. And he was thinking about it. He was coming up with things. Well, that's because he's moved that unconscious bias to a conscious level and did something about it. And so if he missed it, he would have totally missed it, and they would have missed out. And that's why people feel left out. That's the inclusion. That's just an example of it.
I just want to point out to our viewers that this is what you do. You do strategic relationships with different companies and show them how they can better their relations with their employees, etc. Right? Is that what you do? Tell us what you do.
I do executive coaching and business development coaching, and so I have gone into this area because I think it's just so important to help people to recognize these things. And most of the people that I work with in companies, I work with a lot of women in large companies who are in-house lawyers, and I also work with a lot of lawyers and professional service providers in law firms doing business development, all about relationship development.
Yeah.
But this is all part of relationship development.
Very
It's
important.
about recognizing it.
Fascinating.
So what he was telling me this morning, I just spoke with him this morning about this, and I said, I'm coming on this show and we'll be talking a little about unconscious bias. And he said, this is such an important topic. It is so important that people recognize it. He said, you have to be, his words were, you have to really be conscious of your biases when you're an institution and you have the power.
Especially when you have power.
And he said, people just don't take the time to do it. And I said, can I quote you on that? And he said, yes, but I don't want to. But people miss out. So when people are putting together teams of who's going to work in a company, in a law firm, in a professional services firm, who do you pick? Oftentimes women or people of color get missed when white men are putting the teams together.
Yep.
And that's a natural thing that happens, and when it's brought to their attention, they'll recognize it and say, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that.
Yeah, sure.
But if it's not brought to their attention, they may not. And that's, and so what happens? What happens in the business world is the clients lose because they don't get the benefits of the diversity. The organization loses because the clients lose, and the world at large loses, especially the people that are diverse who really need to have the access and need to have the opportunities. And if they're denied it only because they don't look like the other person who has the power and can make the decisions. So
Now,
that's
was
important.
there a
There's a
fourth
fourth
one?
one. Yeah, there
what's
is.
that?
That's and I'd love to hear your take on this one. This is called, we called it in the article, presumed versus earned credibility. And so I'll give you an example of it. You're sitting in a meeting, you've been in corporate companies, you sit in a meeting and you come up with this idea, you say it, silence. 5 minutes later, a man says exactly the same thing and everyone says, what a great idea. You ever hear that? You ever see that happen?
Yeah, my husband does that all the time to me. They can say, is there an echo in the room? An echo? Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I have
So-
heard that.
So there's a presumed credibility when a man says something and a woman has to earn it, which is a little bit on the absurd side.
It is very
you know?
absurd.
So and you know
It
there's
is, that does happen.
yeah,
Well,
so that's what this is about. And then and sometimes you know it happens in interviews. It happens in a lot of things. So we speak a little bit of a different language. So for example, you know, just to go off of this just a little bit, when a woman is applying for a job, and this is stereotypical, and this is what I mean. I sat on a panel with two very senior recruiters that recruit people for large organizations, and I was actually moderating the panel, and they were saying that when a woman is applying for a job, she actually won't apply unless she has 90% of the skills.
I've read and heard that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if a man's applying for the job, it's like 30, maybe 30%, some
Yeah.
much smaller number. So there's a presumption like men tend to judge themselves, or women tend to judge themselves and be judged on past performance, whereas women tend to judge themselves and be judged on past performance, and men tend to judge themselves and be judged on potential. So a woman will come into an interview and say, this is what I haven't done. Here's the skills I don't have, and a man will come and say, I could do anything. You know, but the interviewer if the interviewer has this implicit bias, doesn't recognize that we actually say things differently and look at things from a different perspective.
How do you teach them?
People have to be educated.
Probably
Maybe this show will
yeah,
teach them a little bit, but there's other places. There's a lot of programs out there where people
From the
teach it.
beginning, though.
From the time they're little
beginning.
babies?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
You know what
it
else
could be.
that sort of brings to mind the example of an interview? I have also read, and maybe you have insight into this, that women are less likely to negotiate salaries, whether or not it's in an interview or even when they're already in a position negotiating a salary, say for a raise.
Yeah, we actually, Caroline and I talked about that this morning, Caroline Turner. And I was at a conference where women were talking about that, when oftentimes they're happy, women are happy to get the job, whereas men think they have to negotiate. I don't know what the background is or why that is. That's just one of the reasons. There's a pay equity issue. There's many others, and some of that's going to be resolved by the new pay equity laws, which I think you may have had a program that addresses that a little bit. We have one going in effect in Massachusetts in another year, a
Tell
year
us
and a
about
month.
that one.
It's and they're all over the country. It's just starting to develop. There's like 5 states that have these laws. Basically, you can't ask salary history, and because when you ask salary history, that affects if someone comes in. There's a lot of statistics that say that women have lower salaries than men for the same jobs.
Yeah.
So
Can you ask, what do you expect to get? Like, what salary?
my
do you
understanding is
require?
there were lawyers on a panel, and so my understanding is you can ask what are your expectations, but you can't ask what did you get in your last job. Now I don't know if that law is active anywhere yet, but that law has been enacted in a few states, to my understanding, including Massachusetts. You can't prohibit, and Massachusetts has another one that I read from recently, which is you can't prohibit employees from discussing wages. So sometimes they share, and so it used to be a lot of companies could not share that. So I mean, I'm not going to act as a lawyer here or give legal advice. There's a lot of material out there on this on the web, and there are lawyers that know exactly what the law requires. I would find out if, because I read recently that that employers will have to pull off those questions on their applications come the time when this law becomes effective, which I believe was August. I think August 1 or July 1 of next year. People have to pay attention to this. This is real.
Sure. Yes.
2018.
It's 2018, yeah, and it says, and it also prohibits pay differences for comparable work. So what's interesting about this, it's not. We have a law in Massachusetts, but what if it's a company that has employees in Massachusetts, and what if it's a company in Massachusetts that has employees somewhere else? They're trying to figure all that out now, and I don't have the answers, and I don't, I'm a recovering lawyer, and I don't give legal advice. I say go talk to your lawyer because these things are important.
Legal advice here.
Absolutely.
We just let them know what they can.
There's
do.
things.
Is there a difference between? Would you say that a smaller company has less bias than a larger company? Like if you work in a smaller, say under 10 people, would you be more paid attention to than if you worked in the hundreds of people?
Just from what I know, because I've never seen any statistics, or even if I did, I wouldn't remember them. But I don't think so. I think it's about people.
Really?
It's really about individuals and what biases they have. Yeah.
Well, do you notice before the show you asked our own experience?
Yes.
I remember when I passed the bar many years ago. I was like the only one.
Wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, it was the only one. And when they had a law day at the Norfolk bar, they asked if they could just use my name because they needed a woman, and I was. But today, and back then, it was just men judges, men newscasters, men this, men that. Today, you have women judges, women clerks, women attorneys, women guidance counselors. It's like the woman, you start to wonder, where are the men? and then also women doctors, women newscasters that you never saw before, women weathermen. They used to call weathermen. It's like they're all pretty women now. And even the women interviewers. So they're making it, and as far as black, there's the black are in the shows. You see more and more shows. In fact, there's a blending of America.
Yeah.
Some people say a white male in his 40s or 50s will be a thing of the past soon.
Yeah, there was a book called The End of Men.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
See
it's
that?
very
I didn't
interesting.
even know.
Yeah, it's worth reading. But that's, what you're saying is that, so we see that there's been progress, but where's the progress been? And is the progress on pay? Is the progress on leadership and leader positions? There's a new organization that formed not so long ago. I found out about it around January of this year. It's called Paradigm for Parity. And if you go on their website, they have some really interesting statistics. In the S&P 500, for example, companies, the women are 14.2% of the top executive positions, and 14.2% in the S&P 500, and 24 CEOs out of 500. Okay, women represent 46% of entry level positions. So you see women in positions. 29% are vice presidents. These are their stats, and only 19% of C-suite executives. Okay, so, and companies with, but there's a business case for diversity, and this is the statistics that this organization has are only about women, and they actually show the sources. If you go to their website, the sources for all these stats, and the business case is fascinating. So if you type in business case for diversity into Google, you'll see lots and lots of articles. This one says that companies with 50% women in senior operating roles show a 19% higher return on investment. 19%. And that for profitable companies, a move from 0 to 30% leaders is associated with a 15% increase in net revenue.
No kidding.
Yeah, net revenue margin. I'm not sure what they had margin on there. Most gender diverse companies are 15% more likely to have financial returns above their industry means.
Interesting.
Women make up less than 10% of the 4 most senior level roles in a typical Fortune 100, Fortune 1000 company. So there's a lot of stats on this, but the business case says that we need to have greater diversity.
Sure.
This interview is so interesting, and we have been interrupted. So if anybody sees anything funny, it's the interruptions that you don't see. Or maybe you do see, but that shows that we're human.
We are human.
But anyway, Stewart asked me, when I became an attorney, I had worked, I don't want anybody to know how old I am, but I had worked for several years as a legal secretary. And except they call them now, what do they call them now? Paralegals,
Admins.
they're called now. But
Admins.
a legal
Admins.
secretary back then was worth 10 young lawyers coming out, because in law school they teach you the theory, they don't teach you the practice. So anyway, I passed the bar, and even before I passed the bar, I had my clients all set up. I used to do them cases under my boss's name. He didn't care. But anyway, this lawyer offered me a job as his secretary, and I said, what are you, crazy? I said, I went to school all those years and really worked hard not to be a legal secretary. He said, well, you know, you won't get a job as a lawyer. I said, well, in that day, I said, well, I don't need a job as a lawyer. I said, I'm already practicing. But I had people that told me I was crazy to go to law school. Only one person encouraged me, and I keep saying that, and it turned out, I didn't even know Sharon existed back then. It was the chief of police here, his father.
Yeah. So to
gotta be
him,
He was
kidding.
the only one.
You've got to be
No.
so
kidding.
to everyone but him, you didn't look like a lawyer. Because what did a lawyer look like?
Yeah, well, I always used to hear that anyway, that I didn't look like a lawyer, didn't talk like a lawyer. I says, well, you know, that's the advantage. So what you do, and I remember other women saying, oh, it's hard out there, nobody wants you, they don't respect you, and this and that. And I go, I used to say, you got to be kidding. Because I used to walk, back then it was who you knew, not what you knew. You walk into a courtroom, and you go, you wave to the judge, and I go, I'll go ahead on this one. I'll go ahead on this one. But of course you can't do that today. But I don't know if they still do that, but you don't. But I don't anyway. I don't go to court.
Well, you know, the interesting
Waste
thing
of
is
time.
that a lot of the
Is that
things
funny?
a lot of the examples.
Did you
yeah,
say you got to be kidding?
I said it.
Oh, okay.
I said you got to be kidding.
Oh, okay. No, it's
You
true.
didn't hear me?
No, you got to be kidding.
But you know, I think one of the takeaways from this is women who are watching might recognize that maybe in some ways it's up to them to take the initiative
Right.
and start to change the attitudes.
Well-
Yet the people who are carrying these biases also have to be aware of
I
them.
would also say that men also have to help take the initiative. We have to work together. So if, for example, you're in that meeting and a man hears the woman say something, and a little while later a man say the same thing, and everyone say, what a great idea.
Oh, yeah, they'll
They should
weird.
say, that was such a great idea when she said it earlier.
Right.
Right? And name whoever the person was that said it earlier.
Yeah.
So that you can be an advocate, you can be a sponsor, you can help people in this. And so we all have a responsibility.
I think you're right. I think
Yeah,
you're
you know something? I think you do, and I think there should be more and more. Well, they do more and more courses that are out there, more and more exposure. We'll pass it. By the way, you know, we're in, I think the last time you were on the show, we might have been in 15 towns. We're in 24 towns and cities, too. We're in Boston. Our show is, you got to figure that at least 1,000 people in each city watch it. You're going to be seen, Stewart, by 24,000 minimum people.
at least.
That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And meanwhile, we didn't even get to those books you brought. And I think the last time he was here, we didn't get to
No,
everything
we
that he
didn't.
wanted to do.
Too many
Happy
things.
to come and visit
But you
again.
can see that you care, you show that you care. You taught us that, whether you realize it or not, because we care, and we show that we care, and we had you back, and it's a wrap. The time has passed.
Yes, I do agree. It's evident that the mere fact that you're exploring all of these topics like that is
Put
that you
this
are a
down.
very people-oriented, caring person, and that's what we need, and we hope that you'll be able to, and you are influencing others to think the same way. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
being
Yes.
here. We have so much more we can cover. Love to have you come back.
Yeah.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching. If you have questions or you'd like to know more about this topic, please let us know and we'll make sure that Stewart gets the information, gets your contact information. And in the meantime, please make sure that you let us know feedback, things that you'd like to hear about in future topics and future shows. Because remember, this is your show. The law, your money, and you.